Okay, members, sitting resumed. It's time for questions to the Executive Office. Question 2 has been withdrawn, and I call Nicola Brogan to ask the first question. Nicola Brogan.
Kesh, question number 1, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Officials are currently engaging with victims and survivors groups on the terms of reference for the review of the HIA redress process. Junior ministers met with 2 of the victims and survivors groups recently and reassured them that the forthcoming review would be victim-centred. We have given an undertaking that the victims and survivors representative groups will have an opportunity to see and comment on the proposed terms of reference before they are put to us for approval later this month.
Supplementary, Nicola Brogan.
Gerry Kelly, and thank the Minister for his answer there. Can the Minister also detail the latest figures that have been released regarding the level of redress payments that have been made to date, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the end of September, 2006 applications have been received by the Redress Board. Determinations totalling £28.1 million has been made and £24.1 million paid out in redress.
I call John Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his response to that question. Given the fact that non-state institutions were at the heart of many of those awful stories of historical abuse, and without prejudice in the findings of any report coming forward, does the First Minister envisage that any legal enforcement financial penalties can be imposed on those institutions by way of redress?
Mr. Speaker, we'll be having a meeting later this week in terms of those institutions, and there are 6 different institutions that we'll be meeting with, and we'll be having those very discussions on Thursday.
I call Paula Bradshaw.
Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your answer so far. The Mother and Baby Homes panel report was launched last week, and one of the recommendations was a swift introduction of a redress scheme. Have conversations begun within your department in terms of amalgamating these 2 schemes? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy First Minister and I, along with the Health Minister, met with the expert panel, and that work is now being analysed by the Interdepartmental Working Group, which is chaired by Judith Gillespie, who is independent of government. That work's being taken forward. We discussed it at the Executive last week. We've asked for the assessment to be brought forward to ministers and for the Executive to urgently look at the next steps in the process. I would hope that we would be able to do that sometime in November.
Mike Nesbitt, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering whether the First Minister has given any thought to a proposal that I put on the table some time ago, that the institutions who should be contributing to redress pay a lump sum up front, which could be refunded if it's too much, to take some strain off the public purse.
Mr. Speaker, in respect of these payments, they are being paid, and I welcome that they're being paid at the pace in which they're being done, and the panels that are carrying out the assessments continue to expedite that as quickly as they can. So these payments associated with this redress scheme are being paid. We're having discussions with the institutions later this week about their contribution. Obviously, in respect of the expert panel and the next phase, whenever we look at the mother and baby homes, the Magdalen laundries, the issue of redress is one that we do need to address, and the point that the member has made in terms of the institutions is one that's well made.
Nicola Stewart Dickson.
3.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to delivering all of the Executive Office's NDNA commitments and to moving on those things that have been delayed. Our department has made good progress in a number of areas, including provision of support for victims and survivors of historical abuse, the conduct of executive business and the European Union's Exit Subcommittee.
Supplementary, Stewart Dickson.
Thank you. I'm delighted, Mr. Speaker, to hear the First Minister say all, because to date one might describe the Executive Office as somewhat embarrassed by the paucity of legislation that has actually been brought through this House. In fact, we're at the end of the mandate and we are seeing more private members' business and private members' bills being debated in this House rather than business being brought forward by the Executive Office and the First and Deputy First Ministers. Can they up their game and guarantee that all of the commitments made in New Decade, New Approach will be delivered before the end of this mandate?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. In response to the member, the Executive Office has been incredibly busy making sure that all of the departments of which the First and Deputy First Minister have to oversee in terms of the role of the Executive, and a whole series of legislation was unlocked at the end of June on a range of issues, not least the Justice Bill that his party is the Minister responsible for, organ donation, and there was many other bills that this Executive is now taking forward. I think if any member looks at the legislative programme of this Assembly, it is overwhelmingly being led by the Executive. Of course, I welcome private members' bills, not least my own, which Christopher Stalford has subsequently taken on responsibility for.
Call Emma Sheeran.
And I thank the Minister for his answers thus far. Given that New Decade, New Approach was the basis on which these institutions were restored, does the Minister agree with me that the public have a right to expect it all to be delivered?
And Mr Speaker, when we look at all of those commitments, one of them critically important is the recognition and indeed the implementation of Northern Ireland being an integral part of the internal market. One of those commitments that the United Kingdom government entered into, it was the basis on which my party entered into these institutions, and that needs to be put right. So I agree with the member, all of NDNA needs to be implemented.
I call Steve Aiken.
I thank the First Minister for her answers so far. I noticed in the NDNA commitment it was to do with a lot of issues to do with RHI and dealing with the challenges of RHI. I do notice from the Finance Minister's statement, written statement last week, he refers to a lot of the things to be instituted, yet we've already seen correspondence that said as far back as December 2018 by senior civil servants actions were to be taken. Is this indeed acceptable? And may I also welcome the new member for Fermanagh and South Tyrone. I've just seen you. You're very welcome to the House. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In respect of that, the Finance Minister did provide a written statement to the Assembly outlining the Executive's response to RHI. Also within that response, this Assembly took forward legislation through the functions of government that the member for North Antrim led and my party supported as well. So the Assembly and the Executive have been responding to the findings that came out of the RHI report.
And on a welcoming note, I call Deborah Erskine.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the First Minister detail what progress has been made on the NDNA commitment to increase police numbers?
Well, can I too welcome Deborah, the new member for Fermanagh and South Tyrone, to this House. Deborah is a good friend of the family, and I'm delighted that she's taken up the role and serving the people of the great constituency of Fermanagh and South Tyrone. My family are more from the South Tyrone end, but it is a pleasure for Deborah to be here taking up her role in this House, and I welcome her here. In respect of the commitments around policing, the member is right. This was a key part of the NDNA which my party put forward, and in respect of its implementation to get us back up to 7,500 police officers, the budget did have an in-year allocation of 12.3 million, 9.8 million of which enables the police to retain their police numbers at the current level of 7,000, but the additional 2.5 million has enabled the recruitment of 100 more officers, and that is a step forward in terms of reaching the NDNA target of 7,500, and this party will want to see that reflected in the next budget for the following 3 years to get us to that target.
I'm going to call Jim Allister.
If the First Minister's party only returned to government on the basis that Her Majesty's government, as promised in NDNA, would legislate to restore Northern Ireland's full position within the internal market of the United Kingdom, and that hasn't happened, could he therefore give us an update on his party leader's promise that if it didn't happen in October, he would be resigning him as First Minister and his colleagues?
Well, the member will know that as a result of the actions taken by this party, the Democratic Unionist Party, we now have got to the place where the European Union recognise the harm that's being done by the rigorous implementation of the protocol that most of the parties in this Assembly called for. I welcome the fact that people recognise that the protocol isn't working and that change needs to be made. Of course, some people's assessment of change will likely differ with the assessment that my party will take in terms of what comes forward, but I look forward to the proposals later this week from the European Union. I look forward to the United Kingdom Government in terms of how they will respond to that, and let us get to a place where East-West no longer has any barriers, and of course that is interdependent to the North-South relationship, and I look forward to us getting to that place.
Gerry Kelly, called Gerry Kelly.
question 4, please.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'll ask Junior Minister Middleton to answer this question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Justice leads work on the Interfaces programme, one of the 7 headline actions under the Executive's Together Building United community strategy. Over recent years, the number of Department for Justice-owned interface structures has reduced from 59 to 43. A number of other structures have also been reduced in nature, and the opening times of interface gates have been extended to reduce the significant impediment such structures present to local people. The Executive remains committed to working towards the reduction and removal of all interface security structures, and we look forward to seeing more progress in that area.
Kesh, Gerry Kelly, supplementary question.
Thank the Minister for his answer up till now. Could the Minister detail the total level of investment that has already been put in, allocated under the Together Building a United Community strategy, which he mentioned in his answer?
I thank the member for his question. The agreed 21-2022 executive budget includes funding of £12 million in total for good relations. The TBUC strategy itself includes targeting of removing of all interface structures by 2023. This year, a further £600,000 has been allocated the removal of all interface barriers. So in total, over £6.3 million has been allocated across the TBUC headline actions. A wide range of programmes, of course, contribute to progress on the interfaces, and it's something which the Department will continue to progress as we move forward into the new mandate.
Justin McNulty.
Can the Minister provide an update on future funding for TBUC, given uncertainties going forward?
Yes, well, as I said, just in terms of the executive budget, it does include £12 million for good relations. The TBUC strategy, we continue to progress, and obviously as we move into the current budget debate and move towards looking how we continue to support good relations, is something that we very much have at the forefront of our minds. Obviously, there's continued work to be done, particularly around the interfaces. And it's something that, as a department, we will continue to secure additional funding, if possible, in line with other commitments.
Jemma Dolan.
Question number 5.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy First Minister and I were pleased to announce the launch of the recruitment competition for the post of Commissioner for Victims and Survivors on Monday, the 27th of September. The closing date for applications is noon on Friday of this week, the 15th of October. The Commissioner will have an important role in ensuring that victims and survivors are supported, and we would encourage all those who have the relevant skills and experience to apply. We expect the interviews to take place during the week commencing the 15th of November, with the new Commissioner in post by early 2022.
Jemma Dolan, supplementary question.
And I thank the Minister for that update. Can he also confirm if there's been any progress in terms of the British Government honouring its responsibilities to help fund the victims' pension?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is an issue that I know the Finance Minister, on behalf of the Executive, has been leading, given that it's a financial matter, and continues to engage with the Treasury and make the case for contributions to be made from the Treasury as a result of the outworkings of the scheme, which undoubtedly, whenever changes were being made, made the scope of the scheme much wider than what had initially been envisaged. I don't disagree with that decision, but there was decisions taken by the Secretary of State. It was passed by Westminster, and that did enlarge the scope of the scheme. I think it's right that London would make a contribution towards having those payments made. What I do welcome was the court ruling that made it clear that payments need to be made to victims. That money is being made. It will continue to be made in line with that ruling.
Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the First Minister for his answers so far. Last week, the Victims and Survivors Service published a survey of victims' attitudes. 88% said that it was important to address the legacy of the Troubles. A further 70% said that they were opposed to the central plank of the Secretary of State's proposal, the Statute of Limitations. However, in addressing the legacy of the Troubles, would the First Minister agree with me that it is also extremely important to ensure that the Republic of Ireland addresses its legacy of the past, and in particular those allegations of collusion between Garda forces and the Provisional IRA?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member raises a very important point, one that I know that she has campaigned on for many years and recently led a debate in this Assembly around this particular issue. It is right in providing access to truth for victims that the Republic of Ireland government need to ensure that information that it holds within its possession, information that has been sought by victims and their families, that should be provided. Indeed, we have had evidence, not least in the Smithic Tribunal, which spoke of the collusion that took place between the Gardaí and the Provisional IRA in respect of those particular incidences. So the Republic of Ireland are not bystanders when it comes to dealing with the past. They are very much people who were engaged in and need to provide information to those victims that require it.
Call Colm McGrath.
If the person takes up their post in January, that will have been 16 months since there was last a person in place. Would you agree with me that you owe an apology to the victims and survivors sector for leaving them so long without a voice?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what's been critically important is the functions of the office have continued to be discharged. We have a process now in place to fill the vacancy that has been there, but in the absence of having a Victims Commissioner in place, there has been very important work has continued to be developed. So it is vital that victims get that support. I am pleased that now we have been able to provide support in terms of those payments, and just to update the House in respect of that, by the 10th of October there had been 691 applications received. So whilst yes, I accept there's been the absence of a Victims Commissioner, that in no way has prevented the functions of that office from carrying on.
Mike Nesbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I put it to the First Minister that there is one function that has not been able to carry on because of the absence of a Victims Commissioner, and that is with regard to appointments to the Victims Forum?
Well, the member will know more than most in terms of the important work whenever it comes to the forum, and that is something that can only be done through a commissioner. Under previous commissioners, an action plan had been established for the replenishment exercise to take place. This could be used if it's acceptable to the new commissioner. Obviously, that will be an issue that the commissioner, upon appointment, will want to take forward.
I call on Colm Gildernew.
I can't call you Kesh Dever Shea. Littlehill, question number 6, please.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, Junior Minister Middleton will answer this question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that members and their constituents share our goal of high streets that are thriving places for people to do business, socialise, shop, be creative and use public services, as well, of course, as being great places to live. The High Streets Taskforce is chaired by Junior Ministers Kearney and I. As members, we have met with those across the government, business, academia, professional bodies, trade unions and indeed the community and voluntary sectors. It has been identifying challenges and considering solutions to continue to make our high streets, towns and villages thriving and sustainable places. The key themes and issues have been identified, and comprehensive engagement with stakeholders is currently being worked up and will commence later this month with a call for evidence. We will seek the widest possible engagement and sharing of views and experiences when the call for evidence gets underway. The findings from the call for evidence, together with other data, will inform a draft report and recommendations that will be subject to full public consultation and equality considerations before a final report is presented for agreement by the Executive by spring 2022.
Supplementary, Colm Gildernew.
And I would also like to welcome my fellow constituency MLA Deborah Erskine to the Assembly, and I look forward to working with her on behalf of all the people of our constituency. And in that respect, Minister, I'm sure you will join with me in welcoming the fact that the High Street voucher is finally underway. But do you also agree that longer-term strategic support is needed to revitalise sustainably and properly our high streets?
Can I thank the member for that question and join with him, of course, in welcoming Deborah Erskine to her place and wish her well representing the people of Fermanagh and South Tyrone. I completely agree with the member in terms of the High Street voucher scheme and the specific issues that it has, particularly relating to the Department for the Economy. It is something that we need to ensure that when this report comes forward, and I am confident that the membership of the High Street Taskforce will do its work, and when we bring forward the report, that it will be sufficient in terms of looking at the long-term benefits, not only of the High Street voucher scheme, but also how we ensure that we reinvigorate our high streets going into the future.
Stewart Dickson.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. Do you recognise that speed is also of the essence when it comes to revitalising our high streets? While I appreciate that a task force will have a longer-term job and role to perform, our high streets are under extreme pressure now, particularly, for example, in relation to utility costs.
And I thank the member for his question. And of course, speed is always important, but at the same time, it's important that we get these actions right. The High Street Task Force itself just last met on the 8th of September of this year, and we will meet again on the 20th of October. It has a long-term focus in terms of addressing the pressing need for the transformation of our high streets in response to fundamental societal and economic changes, indeed, as Mr Dickson has mentioned. It's very much a long-term project. Transformation will not happen overnight. Significant work has already happened and gone on to get us to this point. The call for evidence will, of course, launch very soon. That will provide an opportunity for people to have their say and will be an essential step in terms of bringing the vision to life and seeing the results at the street level. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call John Stewart.
I thank the Junior Minister for his answers so far. He will know my passion for town centre regeneration, and I shared with him on that in the Economy Committee, and we had many discussions on that. It does feel like the member for East Antrim says that many of our independent retailers are on their knees, and for many of them are looking at this as the last-ditch hope to try and save our town centres. Given how long this is going to take, what in the interim can we do through collaborative working with local councils and others to try and keep the wolves at bay from those businesses that are really under pressure in town centres?
Can I thank the member for his question? And I agree with the member. In terms of over recent years, departments have implemented a number of programmes in our town and city centres to improve their attractiveness, not only as places to shop, but as places to work and socialise and invest in as well. Government has been investing in our town and city centres for decades through regeneration programmes, but new issues have emerged which have, of course, had significant impacts which need to be addressed. Funding has been approved to provide the secretarial support for the High Street Task Force, and that has been located within the Department for Communities. At this stage, it's of course too early to envisage what further funding will be required until the High Street Task Force final report and recommendations have been agreed by ministers. But it is important to note that under COVID recovery, COVID-19 revitalisation funding of £19.3 million has been allocated to councils to enable support for a wide range of schemes, including physical interventions, streetscape improvements, signage and dressing, as well as access and connectivity as well. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Maurice Bradley.
Question 7.
Firstly, can I reiterate that we are pleased that the scheme has now opened for applications. It is hoped that the opening of the scheme will have a positive impact for all who have suffered permanent disablement. As of the 10th of October of this year, I can confirm that there have been 691 applications received to the Victims Payment Scheme for permanent disablement since it opened for applications on the 31st of August of this year.
Supplementary, Maurice Bradley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, can I also welcome my colleague Deborah Erskine to her place, the new member for Fermanagh and South Tyrone. I wish her all the best for the future. Mr Speaker, can I ask the First Minister what consideration will be given to applicants without the required medical evidence? Given the fact that the record keeping was not as thorough as it is today and applicants may find it difficult to get such evidence, the application basically asks for medical press reports as evidence of the event. Many doctors, consultants, etc. have retired or passed away. And indeed, many local newspapers may not be with us much longer. So could the Minister please look into that for me? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The issue that the member raises is one that many of the groups involved in the development of this scheme have raised with our office. It is vitally important that when people are presenting themselves, whenever it comes to the medical assessment of the need that exists, that is done with a very sympathetic understanding. People should not be having to go through a process when it is absolutely clear that it's not necessary for them to go through it, because it is obvious as to the need that does exist. So the member raises an important issue. It's one that we're very much alert to.
Can the Minister provide an update on the latest projections for the overall cost of the Victims Payment Scheme?
Well, the costing of the scheme was calculated through the pension system that exists around any assessment. So the total cost of payments that has been estimated range from 600 million to 1.2 billion, the central estimate of that being 248 million before administration costs are added. We won't know for certain the costs of this until we have received all of the applications. So at this stage, these are estimates, but the figures should be able to crystallise whenever there is a much clearer understanding as to the volume of applications that are going to be made.
Mr Speaker, and I'm going to return without apology again to the Victims and Survivors Survey. When I look at the survey, around 76% of victims and survivors who were surveyed believed that their views were known within the suicide prevention strategy, but very, very few actually believed that their views were heard within the anti-poverty strategy. One of the things that victims and survivors have indicated would be useful, First Minister, is for policy champions within departments. Some of those policy champions already exist in relation to racial equality, etc. Would this be something that you and the Deputy First Minister would take forward as a matter of priority for victims and survivors?
The development, Mr Speaker, of the scheme, there was extensive work with a wide range of organisations coming from victims and survivors. That had a key part in terms of the way in which this scheme has been set up. It was the Department of Justice that carried out the administrative work in terms of establishing the panels, and it was through the work of the victims and survivors. A lot of information that we were able to glean from that has informed this process. So the member makes a critically important point that whenever government is developing schemes, it needs to be victim-centred. They need to have a key part of developing that process, because ultimately it's to them that we're seeking to provide the best possible support, so their voice must be heard.
Moving on, I call Pat Sheehan.
Kesh to Hawk, question 8, please.
Mr Speaker, the EU settlement scheme is an expected matter. However, we recognise the valuable contribution that EEA citizens living here make to our economy, culture and wider society. We know that the situation with status can be confusing for EEA citizens, employers and service providers alike. We believe it is essential that those citizens can demonstrate their status easily when needed. We wrote jointly with ministers from Scotland and Wales to Kevin Foster, the Minister at the Home Office, to urge that the current digital-only proof of status be supplemented with a form of physical proof. We are awaiting a response.
Supplementary, Pat Sheehan.
Thank the Minister for his answer. Would he agree with me that EU citizens continue to play a vital and positive role in our society and economy, and that they should be treated with fairness and with respect?
Mr Speaker, I do agree with the member in respect of the vitally important contribution they make to our society and indeed to our economy. It should be noted that those citizens that did apply to continue to live in Northern Ireland, whilst that application is under consideration, they continue to have their rights fully protected.
I will call Jim Allister, and the member will not have time for supplementary.
Question 9.
That there are differing views across all parties in the Executive on the merits of both EU exit and the protocol. However, we are united in our desire to seek the best possible outcome for our citizens and businesses, and as an Executive we continue to regularly discuss issues relating to European Union exit and to represent our positions in our engagement with the United Kingdom's Government and the European Union.
Supplementary, Mr Allister.
Would the First Minister agree that it's untenable, given the nature of the protocol as a union dismantling instrument, imposing a partitioning of the United Kingdom, imposing checks because the rest of the UK is regarded as a third country? Does agree it's untenable for any unionist minister to continue to implement the protocol, and if that is the price of Stormont, isn't that a price that no unionist could pay?
Well, Mr Speaker, Mr Allister has been reading my leader's speeches very well whenever it comes to wanting to address these issues. We're clear, the UK Government command paper set out the issues which the protocol has now inflicted upon the people here in Northern Ireland. That has been reiterated lately in terms of Lord Frost's contributions. I recognise the European Union and acknowledge their recognition of the harm that is causing. We await to see the detail of their proposals. We await to see the outcome of the negotiations that will take place between the UK Government and the European Union, and then my own party will make an assessment at that stage as to what is in the interests of Northern Ireland in terms of the outworkings of that. But we're fundamentally of the position that we must have the New Decade New Approach commitment entered into by the UK Government, that Northern Ireland's place within the internal market is fully respected. That means removing the barriers that have been created by the protocol on an east-west dimension.
And that ends the period for list of questions. We now move on to 15 minutes of topical questions, and I'll call Linda Dillon. Could we please have Linda Dillon on screen, please? Could you invite Linda Dillon to... Could I invite you, the member, to put your question?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Minister, the High Court has just ruled in the last hour that DUP ministers are acting unlawfully in their boycotting of NSMC. What is your response to this ruling?
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the member for that question. Obviously, we will read through the judgment that has been passed in the courts, and we'll provide a more detailed response to that in due course. But I would make this point, Mr Speaker. Whenever it comes to the working of the North-South institutions, my party has made clear that we do wish to see all of the parts of the Belfast Agreement upheld, but they are interdependent, they are interlinked, and the East-West dimension has been trashed as a result of the protocol. It is regrettable that that is having a knock-on effect on the North-South institutions. My focus is on wanting to have these issues resolved so that all of the parts of those institutions are able to function normally. However, the protocol has fundamentally undermined the basis on which the Belfast Agreement set up those various different strands.
Supplementary, Linda Dillon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the Minister for his answer. Minister, in light of the ruling, can you confirm if you will be ensuring that DUP ministers will now attend NSMC in compliance with the law, particularly given that we potentially have a loss of £1 billion? This is essential money. It would be at any time for our communities, from health to education to economic development, but particularly coming out of a pandemic. This money and finance is absolutely essential. So can you give us some assurances that DUP ministers will now, in line with law, attend NSMC meetings?
Well, Mr Speaker, my party is very much focused on resolving the issues that have created this impasse. That's the protocol. It's the undermining of our East-West relationship and the interconnection that that then has on the various bodies that flows out from the Belfast Agreement, and that includes the North-South. I want to see these issues resolved. That's what our party is focused upon.
Mark Durgan.
I thank the First Minister for his answers to date. Will the First Minister support the allocation of resource in the October monitoring round to reverse the universal credit cut?
Well, Mr Speaker, this is an issue that the Executive did discuss, and indeed the Deputy First Minister and I have taken action around this by joining with our counterparts in Scotland and Wales and asking for the UK Government to reverse its decision. Indeed, on the back of the most recent Executive meeting, again we will be corresponding on behalf of all of the ministers within the Executive that the withdrawal of the £20 uplift is an unacceptable one. It shouldn't have happened. We want to have it reinstated, and that's the position that we'll be articulating to the Executive, to the Treasury.
Mark Durgan, supplementary.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. I think I appreciate his commitment to having this issue resolved. However, I asked specifically around the October monitoring round. We are aware that the Communities Minister has made a bid for £55 million to reinstate this lifeline to struggling families and individuals out there. Will the First Minister commit to prioritising this issue within the Executive, working with colleagues, particularly the Communities Minister, to identify a mechanism that will ensure its swift reinstatement?
Mr Speaker, the member raises a very important point, and that would indeed be the mechanism if we were able to find the additional funding that would be required through October monitoring. This is a payment which has been made through the Department of Work and Pensions. The systems are not here in Northern Ireland to do that. And so the member is right. What would the mechanism be? When it comes to the October monitoring, we know that departments have not released significant amounts of funding. Indeed, it is negligible, and the Department of Health has a bid-in of £240 million. We are due to get funding, and we do have it, of £180 million that flowed from the additional spend in the health service in England, and we get that through the Barnett Consequentials. So given that Health has a bid-in for £240 million, we're going to be in receipt of £180 million. The question arises, would the finances be there? But even if it was, having a mechanism for this to be paid would be challenging to the Executive. So I think we need to be honest with the people who are in receipt of this money, which is vitally important to them, and nobody underestimates the harm that it does to them, nor should we make false promises or raise hopes, because I think that's particularly unfair given the vulnerability of the people that are involved if there is a false hope created.
Can
the Minister update us on any discussions the Executive Office has had with business leaders regarding the opportunities for dual market access?
Well, Mr Speaker, this goes back to the issue of the protocol. The protocol was presented by those that advocated its use of giving us the best of both worlds. That simply is not the case. And the UK command paper shows about the displacement of trade that had been flowing east-west, which is no longer flowing on that basis. It has an impact on the supply chain. And so if the member is wanting to articulate the advantages of having access to the single market, he needs to be able to address the disadvantages, because they far outweigh any advantages that the member may seem to believe that the protocol provides in terms of having dual access.
Supplementary,
Does the member not agree that the protocol has provided us with a unique opportunity to actually access both markets, and the fact that InvestNI has provided information recently that there's up to 30 FDI investors are now looking at the North as an opportunity? Does his party's opposition to the protocol not fly in the face of those business leaders who want to seize opportunity of this unique opportunity for dual access to both markets?
Well, Mr Speaker, again, I would say to the member, whenever we look at the number of checks that are being required, and they're nowhere near the level that they would be had the grace periods not been extended, you would have been looking at around 25,000 checks taking place per week. That is wholly disproportionate to what is required to protect the integrity of the European single market. And so the member, I think, would do well to encourage those within the European Union to recognise the harm, and that there needs to be solutions so that we can avoid the disadvantage which the protocol has placed upon the people of Northern Ireland and its businesses.
Colm Gildernew.
Minister, in light of recent comments by NIO Minister Conor Burns, can you reiterate the opposition of this Assembly to the British Government's amnesty proposals?
Well, Mr Speaker, my party doesn't support the proposals that have been tabled by the NIO in terms of what it is that they're trying to achieve. We've made clear that the victims should be central to any process whenever it comes to getting truth and justice, and that remains the position of my party.
Supplementary, Colm Gildernew.
Thank you for your answer, Minister. Conor Burns claimed that his government was willing to listen to alternative legacy proposals, but that there would need to be consensus among the political parties here. Do you agree with me that the legacy mechanisms agreed at Stormont House represented just such a consensus, and that the British Government should now stop stalling and get on with implementing those?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's some years now from Stormont House in terms of what was proposed at that stage, and there has been evidence of cases being brought forward which continue to lean heavily whenever it comes to the state. 90% of all killings that took place during the past were carried out by paramilitary organisations. That's where the focus needs to be. There has been an imbalance whenever it comes to the constant pursuit of state forces, given the 10% which is attributed to them in terms of the loss of life. So I want to see victims get to the truth. We also need to have confidence that in doing that, those, and primarily the paramilitary actors that were involved, those terrorists that were involved, will tell the truth. And there's a long way to travel before I believe a lot of victims are going to have confidence that those paramilitary terrorists are ever going to tell the truth.
Nicola Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answers so far. Could I ask the Minister, in terms of an economic question, he recognised the benefit of the Maze-Long Kesh Development Corporation and the very good work that was being done by that corporation before we hit the pandemic situation. Could I ask the Minister when he would expect the Development Corporation to return to full working operation and indeed to make progress on the full economic development and full potential of the site?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I always welcome members that don't represent the Lagan Valley constituency advocating for its economic development. There's no doubt that the Maze-Long Kesh site is uniquely placed in terms of its geographic location and its access to main arterial routes. So it is an area that does need to be developed. We do need to maximise that economic opportunity for which that site represents. And of course, that is something that the member has raised, and that's something that I will look at.
Supplementary, Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer. But I'm not particularly interested in the economic development of his own constituency, but indeed the potential of the Maze-Long Kesh to be much wider than his own constituency. And indeed, could I ask the Minister if he would believe that my constituents, who are represented by the Castlereagh East part of Lisburn, indeed would be well represented if the Maze Development Corporation had a member of the Lisburn City Council as a full member of the corporation?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member is right in terms of the Lisburn City Castlereagh Council falls into this development opportunity, and it is of regional significance, and it's not just something that would benefit Lisburn. All of Northern Ireland will benefit whenever the Maze site is fully developed. In terms of the representation on the cooperation, I think the member raises an important point that having a direct representative from the Council would add value to it, particularly given that any potential economic benefits may well seek to have support from that Council in terms of potential funding that may be necessary to unlock the opportunities that exist.
Pat Sheehan.
First Minister, the Health Minister confirmed this week that unvaccinated individuals over the age of 50 are 5 times more likely to be admitted to hospital with COVID. Will the First Minister show leadership and make COVID certificate mandatory in spaces where social distancing requirements have been removed to protect citizens, businesses and prevent a further lockdown?
Well, Mr. Speaker, thankfully the overwhelming majority of those that are 50 and over have received both vaccines, and that has provided them with the kind of protection that wasn't there in previous waves of this virus. That's why we haven't had the same hospitalisation rate. Whenever I look at what happened back in January of this year, at one point there were over 800 people occupying beds in our hospitals that had COVID. As of today, it's at 314. That's as a result of the rollout of the vaccination programme. We aren't having the same number of deaths, and every death is something which is more than regrettable whenever it happens, but we're not having the same severe health impacts for people that are aged 50 and over that we were having, and that's because of the vaccine programme. The issue around a certification, I've asked for what would be the scientific, the medical basis for that. It requires the weighing up then of equality impact considerations, human rights considerations, and I'm sure the party opposite, the party of civil rights, would want to make sure that before you would introduce such a scheme which would impinge upon people's civil rights, that those kind of assessments are carried out before a decision would be taken.
Pat Sheehan, supplementary.
Thank you. With rights comes responsibility, and it was already stated that it is 5 times more likely that you'll be one of the ill ones in the hospitals at the moment. If the First Minister wants to increase vaccination, why doesn't he make a decision to mandate passports? And can he confirm if all his MLAs are double vaccinated? Yes or no? Simple.
Mr. Speaker, I really do regret this demand to ask people have they been vaccinated or not. We are at a point in our society where people who have not got the vaccine, and I wish they did, I really wish they did get it, but they haven't got it. And it is not the place of either members of this society or indeed other members of society to be asking people, have you been vaccinated or not? We don't do it for any other type of illness. Nobody walks up to somebody and says, are you on medication because of your depression? Are you taking medication because you've got a heart condition? Are you taking your medication because you've got cancer? And there comes a point where we need to respect people's decisions when it comes to this. I have received my vaccination. I have taken both vaccinations. But the way in which people are trying to coerce people, actually, it's counterproductive. And if you allow people to listen to the medical and the scientific advice without these coercive attempts, you'll have a better outcome.